Rifle marketing today loves to tell you that newer is always better. But out past 200 yards, when wind, drift, and recoil flinch separate the amateurs from the steady hands, age doesn't matter. Performance does. This is true for both the shooter and the caliber he uses. Unfortunately, the cartridges that already solved these problems decades ago have now fallen by the wayside. Want to know which ones? In this video, we'll talk about 9 forgotten hunting calibers that quietly outperform many modern offerings in the only categories that really count: precision, trajectory, terminal performance, and shooter confidence. These powerful cartridges once knocked moose off their feet in the Swedish woods, flattened coyotes on American ranches, and cleaned up whitetails with soft-spoken accuracy. Sadly, they vanished from store shelves as we all chased the next big thing. Some drift easy with barely a kick. Others scream past 3,000 feet per second and stack holes like match ammo. But they've all got one thing in common. They perform way better than folks remember. We're digging into these underrated gems. Time pushed them aside, but veteran marksmen never let them go. And chances are, after this, you won't either. When Commonwealth veterans came home, surplus Lee Enfields followed them into the deerwoods, and the .303 British quickly shook off its purely military label. Sporterized No. 4s and SMLEs shooting 150-grain soft points at roughly 2,690 feet per second, or heavier 174-grain round noses at 2,460 feet per second, could group inside an inch and a half if the two-piece stock was properly bedded. Recoil feels more like a firm shove than a punch, and that encourages deliberate trigger work, a recipe for accuracy on paper and clean kills in the bush. A 174-grain soft point carries nearly 308 level energy to 150 yards, while the lighter 150-grain load shoots flatter than many hunters expect. Handload data from modern brass and varget routinely produces 1-inch clusters from Parker Hale conversions or BSA Monarch sporters, rifles that still appear in Canadian pawn shops every fall. On black bear bait sites, a 180-grain spear hot core at 2,450 feet per second penetrates end-to-end without excessive meat loss. And at woods distances, the .303's moderate velocity lets cup and core bullets open reliably but stay together. Its rimmed case and generous chambers limit pressure, so top-end velocity never quite reaches 308 levels. Yet inside 250 yards, that matters far less than a steady rest and a crisp sight picture. Iron-sighted Lee Enfields still drop moose in Newfoundland each November. Hunters praise the cartridge's gentle report and fast follow-up capability from the smooth cock-on-close action. The .303 may lack modern glamour, but it keeps proving that mild recoil, reliable rifles, and consistent 1:1.25 MOA accuracy make a field combination worth preserving. Germany's full-power service round of both world wars measures success by elk, boar, and red stag rather than likes on social media. A standard 198-grain Spitzer at over 2,600 feet per second hits with nearly 3,000 foot-pounds. Yet the cartridge's reputation for brutal recoil is overstated. A full-weight K98K delivers less shove than many Magnums and maintains admirable accuracy. Properly floated military barrels or modern sporters, such as the CZ550, frequently print 5 shots into sub-MOA clusters once bullet diameter, throat length, and bedding are sorted. Handloaders find that 150-grain Nosler ballistic tips scream past 2,900 feet per second without pressure signs, producing a flat 250-yard zero and devastating wound channels on whitetails. Where the 8mm shines brightest is deep woods authority. Heavy, high sectional density bullets penetrate moose shoulders or wild boar shields with ease, and retained velocity keeps trajectories manageable to 300 yards. European hunters still trust Yugo M48s and BRNOV Z24s on driven bore lines because the round cycles smoothly through Mauser, feed rails, and powers through brush without tumbling. In the States, the cartridge faded behind the .30-06. Yet when a vintage carabiner posts sub-MOA groups at 100 yards, skeptics pay attention. Modern optics on a rebarreled K98 turn the platform into a legitimate 600-yard steel ringing machine. The 7.92 by 57 remains proof that balanced case design, modest pressures, and plentiful rifle options create an enduring accuracy recipe that still competes with 21st century offerings. Paul Mauser's 1892 creation marries mild recoil to surprising downrange authority. A modern 140-grain boat tail at 2,800 feet per second gives drop and wind numbers comparable to today's hot rod 6.5s, while pushing a higher sectional density through bone and muscle. Many surplus Spanish 1893s still cluster into 1.5 MOA with battle sights. Convert one to a glass-topped sporter or start with a Ruger No. 1 International, and groups shrink below an inch. Hunters praise the cartridge for its forgiving recoil and thrilling terminal behavior. African legends tell of Karamojo Bell brain-shooting elephants with 173-grain solids and a Rigby 275, albeit at close range. In the Rocky Mountains, a 150-grain partition leaving the muzzle around 2,700 feet per second stays above 1,800 feet per second at 300 yards, plenty for elk lungs and certainly for mule deer ribs. Rifles like the CZ 550 or a well-bedded Model 98 feed flawlessly, thanks to the gentle shoulder taper, and the round's efficient powder column delivers consistent velocities from 22 or 24-inch barrels. The 7x57 quietly influenced later icons. Stretch it to .30 caliber, and you have the 30-06. Neck it to .25, and you get the beloved Roberts. Yet, the original still deserves a spot in the rack. When a century-old Chilean Mauser nips a 2-inch gong at 400 yards, modern Magnum owners suddenly remember that energy, accuracy, and low recoil once coexisted happily in a single cartridge. Remington engineers necked the 30-06 down to 7 millimeters in 1957, nudged the shoulder forward .051 inch, and unintentionally created a cartridge too sensible for its marketing department. A 140-grain AccuBond at a true 3,000 feet per second flies flatter than a 270 with better wind numbers. A 160-grain partition at 2,900 feet per second drifts less than a 30-06 of similar weight while packing more sectional density. Real-world rifles, think Model 700 Mountain or Browning X-Bolt stainless, frequently shoot inside 3/4 of an inch without exotic bedding tricks. And recoil feels closer to a 270 than a 7 Magnum. The case burns powder efficiently, extending barrel life beyond many Magnums while still ringing steel at 700 yards with a simple duplex reticle. When elk hunters anchor big bulls at 450 yards using 150-grain Barnes TSX, leaving at 2,980 feet per second, skeptics stop laughing. Why is the round still obscure? Remington's early decision to launch it first in autoloaders, then rename it 7mm Express, confused buyers just as the 7mm Remington Magnum grabbed headlines. Yet today's handloaders know that 60 grains of medium slow powder behind a bonded 150-grain bullet yields a do-everything load. Whitetails drop cleanly at 80 yards, and pronghorn tags get punched at 400 without scope dialing. Balance, the ability to go long without bruising shoulders, remains the 280's ace. And every time a Nosler M48 prints cloverleafs, the cartridge's underdog status feels increasingly undeserved. Remington's attempt to outpace the 243 arrived in 1955 with a 1-in-12 twist that wouldn't stabilize 100-grain bullets, and hunters unfairly labeled it a varmint round. When the twist switched to 1-in-9 and the name to 6mm Remington in 1963, the marketing war was already lost, but the ballistic race certainly wasn't. A factory 100-grain soft point at 3,100 feet per second owns coyotes to 500 yards, and handloads pushing a 105-grain Hornady A-Max at the same speed flatten trajectory even further thanks to a .500 ballistic coefficient. Custom rifles with 24-inch barrels and long magazines nudge 85-grain partitions past 3,400 feet per second, yielding laser beam arcs for light deer. Sub-half MOA groups are routine in properly bedded Model 700 varmints or rebarreled Ruger 77s. Recoil hovers below the 243 while downrange energy stays higher, so follow-up shots are almost instantaneous. Prairie dog shooters appreciate the generous free bore that keeps pressure mild even at top velocity. Big game hunters love the way a 100-grain partition opens at 2,900 feet per second and exits a whitetail with minimal meat loss. Coyotes hit with a 75-grain VMAX simply crumple. The cartridge's greatest strength may be its flexibility. Varmints, predators, and deer all fall to the same rifle with only a bullet change. Winchester unleashed this round in 1959, advertising a 140-grain Spitzer at 3,200 feet per second from a 26-inch Model 70 Westerner. Long-range fanatics rejoiced, but early chrome moly barrels eroded throats in fewer than 200 rounds, and rumors spread faster than facts. Today, cut-rifled stainless or hammer-forged 5R barrels shrug off the heat, and a 140-grain Berger VLD at 3,240 feet per second reaches 1,000 yards with less drift than many modern short magnums. Loaded down with 120-grain Barnes TTSX at 3,300 feet per second, flat trajectories turn mule deer into chip shots across coulees. 3/8 MOA groups appear regularly in rebarreled Ruger Hawkeyes or custom Defiance action rigs, proving the long, beltless case feeds smoothly and burns powder efficiently. Recoil sits above a Creedmoor but below a 7mm Remington Magnum, and because velocity is the name of the game, hunters often find themselves using one reticle hold from 50 to nearly 400 yards. Critics still claim the cartridge is hard on barrels. Practical experience shows that a modern tube handles over 1/200 rounds before accuracy falls off, which for most hunters equals decades of field shooting. Purists argue that a faster 6.5 delivering superior external ballistics while retaining Creedmoor-like penetration deserves another chance. And elk guides in Wyoming who watch 130-grain AccuBonds punch both lungs at 540 yards agree. Neck a 7x57 case to quarter bore, keep pressure sane, and you have a cartridge that shoots as gently as it sounds. A 117-grain Sierra Pro Hunter leaving at 3,000 feet per second remains above 2,000 feet per second at 400 yards, and hand loads tuned to a Kimber Hunter or Winchester Model 70 featherweight often hide under a 1-inch dot. Recoil barely nudges 9 foot-pounds in a 7-pound rifle, so even new shooters can spot their impacts through the scope. The round handles pronghorn, axis deer, and even cow elk without fuss, provided shot placement is true. Its sub-MOA reputation owes as much to inherently concentric brass as to case geometry. The Roberts headspace is off the shoulder, so bullet jump stays consistent. Old-timers swear by the cartridge for coyote drives because a 100-grain partition anchored behind the shoulder exits clean. And it's quiet enough that the next dog often pauses to look. Factory ammo availability fluctuates, yet handloaders appreciate easy case forming and efficient powder charges. When modern rifles chamber 6.5 trendsetters, the Roberts offers a grace note, mild report, soft recoil, and cloverleafs at 100. Take the 30-06's roomy case, neck it to .257, and suddenly velocity and trajectory leap ahead of the Creedmoor crowd. A 110-grain Nosler AccuBond screaming at 3,085 feet per second prints a 200-yard zero that rises only 1.7 inches at 100 and drops about 6 inches at 300. Easy mental math when antelope are bounding across Wyoming flats. Half MOA groups aren't rare in stock. Remington 700 ADL's once trigger weight and bedding are addressed. Custom tubes pull clusters tighter still. Despite speed, recoil hovers near at 243s, so shooters see bullet impact and stay on target. On tough black bear hunts, a 115-grain partition at 3,000 feet per second drives through shoulder and spine, while 75-grain VMAXs vaporize prairie dogs at 350 yards. Wind drift is slightly higher than 6.5 high BC pills past 600 yards, yet inside that distance the 25-06 holds velocity advantage and therefore energy. Barrel life exceeds the Win Mag 257 Weatherby by a healthy margin, making practice affordable. Ruger M77s, Browning X-Bolts, and Savage 110s all chamber the round, and countless handload combinations exist thanks to the accommodating 06 parent case. Seasoned sheep hunters recall packing sub-7-pound rifles into Alaska's Brooks Range and dropping Dal Rams with single lung shots, marveling at the flat arc and minimal recoil. Born in 1894, yet still eclipsing many modern 6.5 launches, the Swede wins because every part of the system works in harmony. Pressure limits stay lower than the Creedmoor, giving barrels exceptional life and brass-forgiving elasticity. Load a 140-grain Hornady ELDX to a mild 2,700 feet per second and observe groups hovering at half MOA from bone stock Tikka T3s or gently sporterized M96 Mausers. Step to Lapua's 155-grain Mega at 2,560 feet per second, and you gain penetration that moose hunters in Jämtland have trusted for generations. Recoil is delightfully soft, encouraging deliberate trigger press and faster proficiency for newer shooters, while the long, slender bullet rides a gentle 8-degree shoulder case that feeds like silk from staggered magazines. Downrange numbers tell the story. Retained energy at 500 yards exceeds 1,600 foot-pounds, and wind drift rivals the Creedmoor because the Swede's bullets reach distance carrying momentum instead of RPM alone. It anchors Scandinavian moose at forest distances, drops red stag on windswept Scottish hills, and every few seasons, an American hunter rediscovers the cartridge's calm precision. Rifles abound, from elegant Sauer 100s to rugged Howa 1500s, all benefiting from modern optics while respecting the cartridge's long throat geometry. Seasoned competitors use the Swede in vintage military matches, ringing steel at 1,000 yards with iron sights and surplus ammo older than they are. And those are 9 forgotten hunting calibers that give their modern counterparts a run for the money. If you're chasing elk, dialing for steel, or just enjoying recoil that doesn't rattle your molars, these rounds might be worth a hard look. So, what hunting calibers are in your safe? And what would you add after this list? Let us know in the comments. Are there other forgotten hunting loads you swear by, or plan to try next season? Hit like, share this with your shooting buddies, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell for more.